So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about Islamic slavery in Africa.
So Islamic slavery is in some ways similar to a lot of other kinds of slavery that we have in our societies and our history over time. But particularly there are some very key differences. One of the biggest differences is that it's something ordained by God. It's something that you are capable of doing and capable of imprisoning people, particularly in a war-like context. In terms of Africa, eventually at some stage after the 7th century, Islam did grow out of Arabia and into North Africa and then by virtue into West Africa. One of the biggest issues with West African Islamic slavery was that the majority of some of our most prominent kingdoms in the region, the Ghanaian Empire, the Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire, were unfortunately heavily dependent upon slaves. Now, we don't know to what extent slavery was a very popular practice before the advent of Islam, but certainly afterwards it became essential. Kingdoms lived and died by their slaves. Now, when the Europeans, particularly the Portuguese, get involved in trade in the 1500s, if it were not for the already existing Islamic system of slavery and trading of slaves and numbering of slaves and transport of slaves, it wouldn't have been possible for them to so quickly get involved in the practice, then leading into what we know as the transatlantic slave trade. The majority of those who were taken into slavery in West Africa, in places like, for example, Nigeria or Ghana, were non-Muslim. And guess what? Many of the slave raids to actually capture people and then sell them over to the Europeans were conducted by Muslims. And for example, in Nigeria, you have the Igbo people who were one of the biggest victims of slavery in what is now Nigeria. And guess what? They were not Muslim. So when you tally the entire number of slaves taken, African slaves, from sub-Saharan Africa, which includes West Africa, even possibly East Africa and the center, in the Islamic context, you get to a number of anywhere between 7 and 19 million over the 1,400 years roughly that Islam was around. Now, to my knowledge, I don't know about any Islamic abolitionists ever propping up